Hello and welcome and Happy New Year to everyone here today. We are excited that you have joined us to learn more about our unique, first of its kind MLT Racial Equity at Work certification programs. My name is Crystal Lenise Walker, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Director of Racial Equity at Work here at MLT. In 2020, in response to George Floyd's tragic murder, employers across the country announced pledges to make progress towards Black equity. And while we know that pledges, donations, and dispersed one-time efforts are positive and can have an impact, we knew that a systemic, measurable, and a broad-based effort was actually needed to bring about real progress towards racial equity that would be impactful and sustainable. But we also knew that there was nothing in the landscape for DEI leaders, for CEOs, and for those who were passionate at their organizations wanting to know what the resolution was. And that was the case until we launched MLT's Black Equity at Work certification in 2020. Leveraging that same comprehensive framework that we did when we developed Black Equity at Work, we launched Hispanic Equity at Work in 2021. And this was to carefully adapt that framework to meet the needs of Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx communities. And we successfully launched this program in September of 2022. In just 2 short years of launching our first Racial Equity at Work certification program, we now have more than 70 employers across the US who are pursuing racial equity through our MLT Racial Equity certification programs. MLT's approach to moving the needle for racial equity allows us to meet you where you are, whether you're in the early stages of your DEI journey or if you have already established a track record for progress and success. The MLT Racial Equity at Work certification program is really designed as a companion tool. And it provides a measurable framework for leaders seeking a strategic approach to advancing racial equity. Additionally, our certification programs serve as an accountability partner, recognizing your progress, which actually serves as an excellent signal to prospective investors, Black and Hispanic talent, allies, and consumers that you're serious about your commitment to advancing racial equity and that you needed a thought partner to help you get there. But more importantly, that we were the thought partner that you chose. All 4 of the program mechanisms here are set into place to ensure success. From measurement to a clear roadmap with best practices, we offer an extensive support system with dedicated partner success teams, additional support through additional services through MLT advisory support, in addition to having world-class consultants and leaders and thought partners who support, back, and endorse our Racial Equity at Work programs and provide additional support to help you in your journey toward achieving racial equity. Using more than 20 years of our own insights, as well as leveraging best practices across the industries, we realized that there were 5 pillars that could really help organizations and businesses understand how to move the needle toward racial equity in critical areas. Those 5 key pillars support both internal and external progress. Representation at all levels for Black and Hispanic employees. Building a comprehensive workplace culture that's inclusive, that's anti-racist, but that also uplifts all employees and gives them the opportunities to learn, grow, and have a clear path for success. We look at equitable compensation practices to ensure that all employees across the organization are being equitably compensated, but that there are benefits that are in place to help move forward the different systemic barriers that are placed in front of those in our communities that impact their ability to build wealth and generation. We focus on your business practices as well, doing a deep dive in helping you align with creating and developing supplier vendor programs that will impact both your organization, but also impacting the communities at large. And last but not least, our fifth pillar really allows you to align and understand how to make intentional contributions to nonprofit organizations advancing racial equity, but also thinking more strategically about how to invest your cash reserves into larger organizations and larger funds that will actually help to continue to promote Black and Hispanic equity. In just 1 year of participating in our Racial Equity at Work certification programs, specifically our Black Equity at Work certification program, our partners have experienced growth across all 5 pillars with an average of 16-point increase from their baseline assessment in just 1 year. And as of today, we have 11 MLT Black Equity at Work certified partners. And additionally, nearly half of our partners have all developed a strategic and comprehensive plan and reached that first milestone of becoming plan approved through the MLT certification program. Now, I can continue to talk for days and hours about the insights and the impact that we have, but I'm not the one that you're here to hear more about. And so without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our CEO at MLT, John Rice, and 3 esteemed panelists who are all making progress for their organizations as they're participating in MLT's Racial Equity at Work. So without further ado, John Rice, MLT CEO, Indira Arrington, Partner and Global Chief DEI Officer at Aries Management, Kelly Lang, Director of Talent, Diversity, and Inclusion at DaVita, and last but not least, Jason Williams, Senior Vice President, Global Inclusion Strategy for Paramount Global. Thank you all.
Crystal, thanks so much for the great overview and the progress update. And let me start by thanking these 3 great folks, 3 important leaders in the world of talent and the world of diversity and inclusion for joining us today and leading the conversation. Let's just jump right in. And I first, the first question, and I'll ask each of you just to give a tidbit or 2 of introduction in context around your role in your organization as you lead into your answer. But just quickly, and I'll start with Indira. Quickly give a couple tidbits that viewers may not know about your role in Aries and your background. I know you've spent a lot of time in a number of great Wall Street firms. A little background, and then just quickly touch base on, sort of lead with why you all, what was the impetus? Why you all decided to participate and be one of the launch partners for the Racial Equity Work Certification Initiative?
Thank you so much, John. So pleasure to be here today. Indira Arrington, and I've been in my role at Aries for 2 years, and it's for Aries the inaugural role from a CDO perspective. From a background perspective, I consider myself, as John said, a recovering banker. I spent the first 12 years or so of my career in the business specializing in structured products and equity derivatives, and then the last 12 years doing God's work, diversity, equity, and inclusion in financial services. And when I left my last role at one of the big banks and came to asset management, it was very purposeful, because when you look at the landscape of financial services firms, asset management firms are pretty much the worst from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective. They're behind because the industry is so new. Even a company of our size, we just celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. And for me, it was really important coming into this inaugural role into an industry that lacked the structure and the discipline around DEI and running it like a business to ensure that every initiative that we undertook, we really were setting goals, having KPIs, and being able to hold ourselves accountable for the change that we wanted to see. And when we do Great Places to Work, we do a lot of surveys to really understand how talent is experiencing the organization. But what stood out for us from an MLT perspective is obviously the tenure that you have and the knowledge base that you have as an organization on how to drive change and how to do it in a systemic way. So what appealed to us was the ability to work with an organization that's best in class, but that had an actual roadmap and plan that we could execute against. And that allowed us to get the best practices that are working elsewhere and adapt them to our firm, and really give us an opportunity to baseline ourselves and set some very tangible goals over 3 years.
Great, super. And Kelly, let me turn to you and ask you the same thing. Just a few quick contextual comments on your background over at DaVita. I know you've been there, north of 6 years. I mean, more than that actually, and in various roles across the organization. Could you speak to a little bit to that, and just what, from your standpoint, really what motivated DaVita to step in very early and be a leader on this initiative?
Sure. Thanks, John. It's great to be with everyone today. So Kelly Lang, I lead our diversity and belonging and talent management lanes at DaVita. I've been here for almost 7 years, and my background is in process improvement and project management. I actually started at DaVita on an internal consulting team that was focused on improving clinical operations. And so definitely very operations metrics driven, and came into the role to stand up our diversity and belonging program about 4 years ago. Nothing existed. I didn't have any background in that area. And so it was with a lot of research about what worked in other organizations and what we have done that I helped to build the framework that we use today. And DaVita has had a long-standing relationship with MLT. And so when you all approached us to explore what the Black Equity at Work certification would look like, we were interested right away. We've had such a positive experience with you in recruiting candidates for our leadership positions. And when we dug into the certification itself, what I was really impressed with was the rigor behind not just the different buckets of the certification, but how you actually push us to develop a plan. I think when we compare that against other surveys that we engage in, there is not that same level of accountability. And that, I think, is one of the things that really makes this stand out. And that was really interested. It made us very interested in signing on.
Great, super. And let me turn to Jason, I think, whose background similar to Indira and Kelly, had really for most of your career at Paramount and in the previous names, CBS, Viacom, CBS, and so forth. Really on the frontline business. You've spent a lot of your career on the consumer product side and made the transition over to the talent side. Could you give your perspective from having been part of the team that really looked at this early and has been a big champion for this initiative throughout there? What's your perspective on what would you add in terms of like the kind of how it fit with where Paramount was in its journey around racial equity, and how you think and looking back a little bit, how it's sort of played out relative to accelerating, the journey. Again, still very relatively early days in terms of the certification initiative.
Great, yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for having us here today. I mean, we have a long relationship with MLT. Prior to Black Equity at Work, our organization had been involved in some of the programs that MLT does on the development side. So when MLT was brought, the Black Equity at Work program was brought to us through one of our board members, it seemed like a natural cadence to take a look into how it could complement some of the work we were doing. Unlike what Kelly said, we had plans in place already when our board members and John and Andrea and the team had came to present Black Equity at Work in 2020. And we questioned, we said, okay, we have a long established Office of Global Inclusion that has been doing substantive diversity, equity, inclusion work for many years. That was launched by our global head of inclusion. How is MLT Black Equity at Work going to complement the work that we're doing? And how is that going to keep us and push us and challenge us? So we ran all the traps, spent a lot of time with John and his team looking at all of the aspects of the index that were going to either challenge us and make us push the needle in ways that we had not done, or was going to at least keep us accountable for the areas where we had substantively made progress. So that first year of running the traps, looking at the plan, looking at all the areas, representation, compensation, racial justice, and creating a racially just work environment, our philanthropic investments. We looked at all of those areas, and then we looked at the rubric that they were presenting, and we said, okay, this is going to be a great way to drive accountability, make sure that we are driving each of these areas within our organization. And then from there, it just took off.
Thanks so much. And let me pivot, if I could, back to Kelly, and if you could start and kind of give your perspective on the following, which is like the key part of this process. You all have gone through a baseline assessment, and then after that, a reassessment, to achieve certification. And I just want to get your perspective, candidly, for the audience. What's in your mind the value? Okay, the sort of the value drivers relative to having a racial equity certification that includes both, targets, okay, a scoring rubric, and like a transparent measurement system that the organization, your village there at DeVita could manage to. Give us your perspective on how that was accelerating. Any of those are accelerating.
Yeah, I think that as with any organization, what gets measured gets done. And that is very much true at DeVita. And so we really value the specificity that the certification has. It gives us that roadmap. It tells us in no uncertain terms where we have gaps that we might need to fill. And when we do the calculation of what our score is today, and we look at the places where we aren't earning points, it's also helpful to understand what things are maybe more valuable, that have a greater impact on equity, that might be harder to achieve, but would push us to earn more points and achieve greater levels of certification. And so I think that's one of the most important things, is creating that clarity, and that structured framework also lends credibility to what we're trying to achieve. So it's not just points on the board to submit in a random way for some of these other certifications or surveys that we do, but it really helps us understand what we can achieve if we take targeted action in certain areas.
Yeah. And Dear, what would you say? I know that, given what all three of you said around kind of where you were in terms of your journey, I would say, it's probably safe to say that Aries was earlier days than both DeVita and Paramount. And I'm curious, given that, I know you weren't at the very beginning. You all had made meaningful progress and stood up a number of initiatives. But I'm curious, when you thought about the concept of goals and targets and transparent measurement, how did that land there as within at Aries within the context of a certification for racial equity?
So for us, it fit right into our business model. That's what we do. We measure everything, and results are very clear for us in every aspect of our business. What I think it allowed us to do was to really mobilize the organization across the different pillars. So I think what makes people who lead DEI's job really difficult is that we don't usually own the processes where the work has to get done. I'm a chief diversity officer, but I don't have responsibility over every hiring decision. I don't have responsibility over spend that's not within my budget. And if you go down the line, even something like culture, of course, we're driving it out of our function and out of our area, but it's also in partnership with learning and development, talent management, HRBPs. What made this special for us is that it really allowed us to go to each of those groups, and I'll use supplier diversity as an example because it was within this process and over the past 2 years that we stood up our own supplier diversity program. to really be able to go to the procurement function and say, this is why we have to change the process, because we need to be able to measure it. And best in class supplier diversity programs have goals, and we need to be able to set goals. So this really allowed us to go to each of the other functions and create those little SWAT teams that were going to help us get the work done where the decisions are being made. And it really spread the accountability and the support beyond, well, that's DEI. And I think that that's really important if we're really talking about long-term systemic change and embedding DEI in the way that we do business. And I think this process really helped us do that. But also back to something Kelly said, the accountability piece, because now we had a baseline, we knew where we were, and we know where we need to go. And with the assessment a year later, it really allowed us to celebrate those that had an impact and helped us get to this point, but also see the future gaps for next year. So help replan, how are we going to do better in your area for 2023? And then for those areas where we didn't make as much progress, it really made us understand, okay, if we can't do everything, what's going to have the biggest impact for our business and our people, and let's go after those 2 or 3 things. Because like any other change management process, this is a really long-term journey, and we want to ensure that we're capturing some low-hanging fruit, but also being very strategic about the planning that's going to take the longest and going to have that long-term impact as well.
So very insightful, and what I'm hearing, to sort of a couple of emerging themes I'm hearing so far. These first couple of questions. One is the framework and the certification approach, the process, actually helped you all apply the kind of the same level of rigor to racial equity that you apply in every other part of your business. And in every other part of your business is what gets measured gets done. To Kelly's point, your business in the asset management world is about measuring impact and value creation. They're really, from your perspectives, it seems like applying that same level of rigor was something that was kind of embraced and value add from your experience. But the other theme that emerged, and I want to ask Jason about, is that it seems like because the framework cuts across people, which is largely historically the kind of the core work around DEI, cuts across people and business relationships, which includes suppliers and so forth, and your community and investments. It actually has to be a broader team effort. You have to engage a broader set of folks because more stakeholders need to be involved. When you're thinking about cash investments in Black and Hispanic owned led community banks and institutions and so forth, you haven't historically been the people making those decisions, right? So Jason, can you speak about the both the pluses, and the challenges related to that this framework presented with respect to coordination and alignment across Paramount in order to kind of to circle the wagons to take your best shot at?
Yeah, we're in a unique position, like Indira said, their asset management, we're in content management. So we have, not only do we have the challenges that are faced by every other corporation in terms of making sure that there's representation and equity within the workplace, but we also have a responsibility to the community and our audiences, the folks that we serve with our content worldwide. So if we're going to have a equitable representation in front of the camera across the world, whatever equity means, whether it's here in the US or outside of the US, really almost serendipitous that at the time in 2020, we had already begun a process of managing with our senior leadership team, a series of dashboards and representation scorecards where we really in depth went into each and every division to see where we were in terms of representation. So since that work had already started, when MLT came along, it added an additional layer of rigor that honestly we had not really looked into in our first rounds. It added a layer of accountability in some of the more finite aspects of hiring, recruiting, retention. And then with all of the other pieces of the rubric, that developing a 2 to 3 year business plan, we looked at our philanthropic investments, we formed a team, actually, I guess you would call a working team, where each one of the representatives of the working team focused on developing this MLT Black Equity at Work certification. And they really mirrored the silos of the areas of the index where we wanted to push the needle. So we had someone from philanthropic giving, we had someone from HR analytics, we had the diversity, equity, inclusion team working as well. And we had senior leadership buy-in from our board, CEO, senior leaders in HR, in marketing, and philanthropic investment and communications, all working together to make sure our internal messaging was clear about why we were doing this work, what the goals were for our business planning. And when we saw the outcomes, which, I guess we'll talk about a little bit later, we were proud once we achieved the certification that our efforts across the organization, from the top all the way through all of our workforces, even our employee resource groups were involved. Each one of those aspects led to a certification level that showed, okay, we've done great work, here's where we are, and here's the work that we still need to do in order to continue to push the needle. So it was great for us being internally focused as a corporate entity, and also having to look outside to reflect on our content, what our racial and equity effort should look like inside of our company.
Super. And so let me just dig down a little bit, and maybe I'll start with Kelly for your quick thoughts on this. Like, when you think about Crystal talked about almost half of the organizations who have committed to this have gotten to the point where they've got their racial equity plan approved. That plan approval is based on rigor. It's not based on where you are in terms of points and so forth. It's really about rigor. And I'm curious, as you look back on the experience around developing that plan, going back to your point about like the rubric and the certification helped you all understand and focus on what areas had the most impact relative to equity, and where you can move the needle most. Can you give our audience a sense of how the planning process helped to shape your approach going forward, and talk a little bit about sort of what it helped you, motivated you to do differently, and how an example or two around the value of it relative to the choices that you all had to make within the context of the plan.
Yeah, great question, John. When we did our initial assessment, we scored really high in all the representation and compensation buckets. And so that was kind of like a check for us. We're like, okay, great. Like, we're on the right path. We're doing what we need to do. But where we saw some gaps were in how we were building culture, and specifically supplier diversity was a gap, and some of the investments that we hadn't yet made in our communities. And what I think is interesting, and I'll give an example, is last year, DaVita made a $15 million deposit in Hope Credit Union. That was really transformational. And that was actually something that our finance team was already exploring. And so when we went to them and said, hey, we're doing a certification, and one of the ways that we can earn money is if we invest in communities in different ways, they said, hey, actually, we're doing that. And I thought that was really powerful, because what it tells me is that the organization at large is thinking more critically about how else can we strengthen equity in these different ways. And I thought that was really powerful. Another team that we went to was the procurement team, and we said, hey, one of the ways that we can earn points in this certification is by standing up a supplier diversity program. Do we have that? Help me understand if that's on the roadmap. And they said, yeah, that's not on the roadmap yet. It's something that we want to do, but we're not really sure that we have the resourcing to do it right now. We're not really sure how to do it. And so maybe that's something that you can help us with. And one of the things that I've been really impressed by is the amount of resources that MLT is bringing to bear. And so when we came back to you and said, hey, supplier diversity is a gap for us, how do we do it? You came back and said, here are all the best practices. Here's the resources that we have to really help us build the roadmap. And to me, that has been one of the keys for us to close the gap. We don't have to go do that research as the DEI team, our small but mighty team. We don't have to go spend our resources figuring out how to implement it. That roadmap already exists. And so it really lowers the barrier for us for how to improve in the future.
Super. And Dira, over to you. If you, one of the components of the planning process is this, kind of a root cause analysis. It just, once you do your baseline, you sort of, here's where we are. And then the question is like, what are the drivers of why we are where we are? Do you have a perspective on how helpful the root cause analysis was in developing a, even more refined approach to what you wanted to do to address those root causes? And any perspective you want to share there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll double down on what Kelly just discussed, which is what's lovely about this process is that you not only uncover the what needs to change, but you also get perspective on the how. How do we actually improve? How do we actually make this better? And that was extremely valuable for us. And to your point on root cause, if you don't know what the problem you're solving for is, then you're not going to come up with the best solutions. So truly being able to narrow down what is it that we need to do differently to make the impact that we want to make and be surgical about our approach and our initiative, I think was integral to being able to improve our score from baseline to our first year assessment. And it's really easy to get people excited about wanting to bring about change. But if you're not giving them the how, it's less likely that it's going to happen. Right. So what I loved about the process was that we were uncovering all of the what's, but also at the same time showing them how we could actually do better.
Right. And as a quick follow-up, Indira, did the plan that you all developed, your racial equity plan, did it differ meaningfully from what the plans that you had previously?
I think they differed meaningfully, but they were definitely additive, especially on that how part, right? Because it's really easy to say, we want to increase representation. Great. We all do. Right. But what am I benchmarking to? What does good look like? Right.
Yeah.
Right. And where am I? And how far am I from great versus my industry peers, which was the other piece that was super useful for us, was the benchmarking data that you brought to the table, both from the companies that were participating in Black Equity at Work, but also the industry data that you brought outside more broadly for financial services. It made us really understand, where our biggest gaps were going to be, and really be thoughtful about how much can we actually change representation over a 1 year period, over a 2 year period, over a 3 year period. So it actually helped us think about goal setting as well. So I think it's really critical to understand what your bogey is, right?
Right.
If not, how do you know that you're getting better? So I think that was another really valuable part for us about going through the process.
Super. Okay, so we're going to do a lightning round. It's really a question around how, if you were talking to the audience of folks who have not decided to take the plunge on this, okay, or even decided but are just getting going, okay, could you just double click on one or two most important areas you think that are most differentiating areas, meaning you all are all highly experienced DEI executives, and how would you talked about the ways in which this initiative is distinct from other kind of, I'll call them certification like initiatives that you all have either looked at or participated in. I know that you've already mentioned things like the how-to support, the roadmap, some of the benchmarking data that comes along with it to build a roadmap. But I just want to get in lightning round. I'll start with you, Jason. Right, when you're if you were having a one-on-one conversation with an organization that was looking at this, and they asked you that question, how is this different? And what's the most the most value-added component of it for you? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say 100%. This MLT process is incremental. It's not additive. It is transformative. It's not transactional. So the how is what we were pushed to assess as soon as we signed on as one of the signatories. We looked not at what we were doing, but how we were going to change it. How are we going to push the needle on diverse slates? How are we going to debias job descriptions? How are we going to diversify our recruitment channels? Not that we needed to do those things, but we actually knew what we needed to do to get to the next level on an index or numerical level. You're not going to be able to do that without yourselves being held accountable. MLT is like that coach who's going to tell you what you're doing wrong, how you can improve, and what you need to do when you get back on the field. It is so valuable. And I'll say this, it's lightning round. I'll say it very quickly. I cannot miss this. On the day that we became Black Equity at Work certified, we were gold certified, one of the first companies to do that. By pure coincidence, on that day, we had 3 civil rights leaders in our offices talking to our employees. We had Reverend Al Sharpton, Derek Johnson from the NAACP, Mark Morial from the National Urban League, talking about progress in corporate America for Black equity. And on that same day, we had become Black Equity at Work certified. So we were able to speak to these leaders about what we're doing in the community and in the business world and confirm that we're holding ourselves accountable as an index and movable, trackable number so that our money is where our mouth is. So I know that's not speed lightning, but I had to say that it is so valuable.
So I really appreciate that. So I'm going to, Kelly, same thing. And I want to give you the opportunity to takeaway point on how it's different. But and or other, if there's another message that you think the audience needs to have regarding DaVita's experience with the Racial Equity Work certification, love you to share any other theme that I haven't been able to bring out of you so far.
Yeah, I would double down on what Jason and Indira said. I think the differentiator is twofold. It's one, the expertise that MLT is bringing to the table to coach us on how to improve our plans. And then it's 2, all the research and guidance that you have pulled together about, hey, if you're not doing well in this area, here's exactly what you can do, or here's a series of options that you can take. Those 2 things in concert really make this unique and different from any other survey that I've engaged in.
Right. Have you all, or Indira, have any of you all begun to share, the fact that you are certified with prospective, talent that you're trying to recruit the organization, or folks that that are high performers that you want to retain? Have you been leveraging it from that standpoint?
Not yet, because our announcement's coming out soon, right? So, but I, it'll be part of our DEI year in review for us for sure. And I will be discussing it when I present to the board in February, as well as one of the wins. And then I guess to your lightning round question, to me, it's the phone a friend. MLT is truly a partner and becomes an extension of your team. And the one question that hasn't come up, is this a lot of work? Yes, it is, but it's necessary work. And it's really nice to have a partner that will walk the journey with you. to get this work done, because if not us, who?
I'll let that be fantastic last word. It is, this is comprehensive, and that it does require engagement from across the business. But which is why we, on the MLT front, we make the effort to actually be there right with you throughout the process. And I want to say, I thank you so much for engaging today. I've got some new analogies, the sports analogy that Jason just gave us, the phone a friend, and we will be using those going forward. But I can't say how much we at MLT appreciate the leadership that you all have brought to this, the insights that you shared today very candidly, and I want to thank all of the folks in the audience for joining.
Thank you again to our esteemed panelists for sharing your time and being so transparent about your journey with MLT's Racial Equity at Work certification programs. Making critical progress on racial equity requires commitment, but our certification programs are here to support that progress. So if you are interested in joining our community of more than 70 plus partners, or aligning with that wonderful line, Jason, that I will be using, that this program is transformative and not performative. That's my new favorite line for 2023. If you're willing and wanting to join this community of employers across the country that are pursuing racial equity with a level of rigor and support that we at MLT can provide, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself. My email is up here, as well as our Associate Director of Business Development, TJ Nichols. We look forward to getting the chance to meet and work with all of you. And thank you again, John, for sharing your time with us this Friday. Everyone have a wonderful Friday and an even better weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.